The uprising in Libya seems destined not to lead to regime change as quickly as the revolutions in Egypt and Tunisia, with Colonel Gaddafi digging in his heels and threatening another Vietnam if foreign countries poke their noses in. Local interest centres around the demand for compensation from Libya for the victims of the IRA terrorism it supported. Yesterday in Parliament, the DUP asked the government to use frozen Libyan assets to pay the victims. Jeffrey Donaldson joins us from Westminster, and Eamon McCann is here to recall his meetings with the now embattled Gaddafi. Mr. Donaldson, David Cameron thought the idea of using frozen assets was ingenious, but he did point out that the assets still really belong to the Libyan people, so it looks like that's not going to be an avenue for you.
Well, it won't stop us exploring that option with our legal team. I accept the point the Prime Minister makes, and it may be in the end that if there is a change of regime in Tripoli, that we will have to press ahead with our negotiations with the new Libyan government to secure a settlement of these claims on behalf of the victims of IRA terrorism. And we are already endeavouring to establish links with key people in Libya so that we can continue to take that campaign forward.
How close were you to agreement?
Difficult to say. Our legal team were actually preparing to leave for a very significant meeting with Saif Gaddafi, who is the son of Colonel Gaddafi and has been the key person, along with Minister Obeidi, on behalf of the Libyan administration in dealing with us on the compensation claims. That meeting, of course, was called off when the situation developed in Libya and the violence and unrest. And then we took a decision that it would not be right to proceed with or continue negotiations with the Gaddafi regime in light of the fact that under his orders, people are being murdered on the streets of Benghazi, Tripoli and other towns and cities.
And what was your impression of Saif?
Well, very difficult to get to grips with the Libyan leadership. They tend to say one thing when you're talking to them, and then get a different story from other sources. I have to say that I was never fully convinced that the Gaddafi regime were going to honour their commitment and their obligation to make good the settlement for the victims of IRA terrorism, though we continue to press and we're hopeful of an outcome. I think if there is a regime change and a more democratic government is installed, then we would be, I think, more hopeful of a positive outcome. And we've made clear to the Prime Minister, as my colleague Nigel Dodds did yesterday during Prime Minister's questions, that we expect our own government to make this a priority when it seeks to normalise relations with a new Libyan government.
Yet a new government may not feel any commitment at all to honour obligations given for actions taken by a regime which they have overthrown.
Yes, but if Colonel Gaddafi's assets are seized by that government, then I think that victims of IRA terrorism have a claim on at least some of the proceeds of those assets. And this is something our legal team will be looking at very carefully. But I think if the new government, a new government in Tripoli, wants to make an impression on the international community, wants to set itself apart from the Gaddafi regime, what better way to do that than to recognise the suffering of innocent people who were killed or seriously injured as a result of IRA bombs and IRA guns supplied by Colonel Gaddafi. I think this would be a significant way of the new Libyan government sending out a clear signal to the international community that it will not support terrorism, that we will no longer have Libyan state-sponsored terrorism, and that they recognise the suffering of the innocent victims of that terrorism.
One imagines that David Cameron will have more important things from his point of view on his agenda if and when a new regime comes in. There'll be oil deals, trade deals. He might not want to upset any apple cart by talking about IRA terrorism and Libyan support for it.
Well, it's worth remembering, Noel, that the people who are making these claims are not just from Northern Ireland. They are people who live in London because of the Harrods bomb, the Canary Wharf bomb, Bishopsgate. They are people who live in Warrington, in Manchester, in Birmingham. They are people who are the constituents of MPs who belong to David Cameron's party. And they will not be silent. And they do not want to see the Conservative government go the way of the Labour government. where they cozy up to a Libyan government, where they make oil the priority and forget about the innocent victims. We're not going to go away, nor are the victims. We're going to continue to press our case, and we'll be knocking on the Prime Minister's door to make sure that he does make this a priority in normalising relations with Libya.
Jeffrey Donaldson, thank you very much indeed.